Alright, in this video we're going to be talking about fossils, relative age, and sedimentary layers. I know this is all very exciting, and so we're just going to step right into it. So first of all, we've got to remember what a fossil is. So a fossil is not a bone. You might think it is a bone, but it's not a bone, it's actually a rock. So here we have dynamite here, and if he gets buried and he dies and his bone gets buried in there, the bone's going to dissolve and it's going to turn into rock. It's not going to stay bone, it's going to turn into rock, okay? So we're going to talk about that process of how that occurs. How fossils are basically the process of turning bone into rock. Also, we want to talk about relative age because the purpose of looking at fossils is trying to develop a timeline of Earth's history. And so we do that biologically by looking at all these different organisms that have been fossilized over time, and we start trying to line them up and saying, okay, this is where these organisms belong, and next thing you know, you've got a history of events that have occurred as long as there's been life on Earth. And so that's why we look at fossils, and we use relative age to determine where things occurred, which occurred before, which occurred after certain events that have happened in Earth's history. Next is the sedimentary layers and the role that they play in helping us determine relative age. But let's start talking let's talk about the two types of fossils that we're going to encounter. So there's trace fossils and there's your everyday fossils. So real fossils, I call them real fossils, are fossils that it's bone or wood. It's some kind of hard tissue that has been fossilized and petrified. So basically that bone or that seashell, whatever it is, has been dissolved and minerals have taken its place. So there's a process that goes into that. Now, a trace fossil, on the other hand, is something that's left behind. So if I have this bowl of dirt, a trace fossil might be, it's kind of hard to see that, but I left a big indent with my thumb, and that would become a trace fossil because now I have left a mark that yes, something was here, some organism was here. So those are trace fossils. So trace fossils have anything to do with something that's not of the body. It could be poop, it could be footprints, it could be leaf prints, it could be tracks, all kinds of things. Eggshells are evidence that there's life there before. And then the real fossils are the ones where it's bone or wood or seashells, something along those lines that have dissolved and been replaced by minerals that turn into rock. So let's talk about that process of turning into a fossil. So first of all, you have to have an organism, and that organism, it goes along, and here's a little organism right here. It goes along, and then it dies, all right? And whenever it dies, it ends up just on the surface of the soil there. Well, it gets buried after that. After it dies, because it stopped moving, at least hopefully it has, right? It gets buried. And so I'm going to just replicate this. I'm just going to kind of pour this in here. Oh, I'm getting dirt all over my clothes here. Oh, well. Don't tell my wife. All right, so it ends up getting buried. And then after a while, after it's been buried, that bone dissolves and you're left with just rock. And then scientists will go through, and geologists and paleontologists, and erosion will do its wonders. And eventually you'll end up with the fossilized form. And so, yeah, that's the rock one. So there we go. So we got the rock. Now, the conditions have to be just right, though, for this to occur. For a fossil to form, it has to be just right. And there's some certain things that need to occur. First of all, soft bodies. This is a marshmallow that I buried here. Soft bodies aren't very convenient for fossilization. They need to have some kind of hard tissue because soft bodies, there's a few things that will happen. One, because it's so soft, it will decay rather than fossilize. And so organisms will come in and they'll just decay it, and it's like it just disappears. Okay? And then the other thing is that if you have a soft body, well, there's things that got to eat, and so they're just going to go along, and then they're going to... That's gross. Yeah, don't do that. They're going to try to eat it before it can become fossilized. So you have that soft body is not a good fossilization organism. So it needs to have some kind of hard structures. And so now let's say that we do have something that's a hard structure, whenever it gets in there, if it also just stays on the surface, which you can probably just barely see it there, if it just stays on the surface or in soil that has lots of oxygen in it, bacteria is going to do its magic, and it's eventually going to cause this to just decay until it's nothing, all right? And then you're not going to have any bone left to be able to fossilize. So the conditions that it needs to have is that it needs to get buried in dense soil, and it needs to do so rather quickly before it can decay. And that soil has to have very little oxygen content. Now there's certain soil or certain locations that's especially easy to do, or more easy to do, I guess you could say, in aquatic environments. So in an aquatic environment, if I go through there and what will happen is that the water will come on top of the soil, and it will help bury that organism in silt, because water usually carries the silt with it, which then goes and it covers up that organism. And so a lot of the fossils that we have are from aquatic environments. That's important to remember. So they get buried, and they keep getting layers added on top of them. And so we're going to see these layers pile up here, and it keeps piling up. And then the bone dissolves, and out comes a fossil. So if I were to dig through here, eventually I would find that, oh, hey, now we have a fossil. This is actually a rock now. It's no longer bone. But another thing that might happen that destroys fossils is that, let's say that it goes through that fossilization process, and that's all great, but then we have the rock cycle. And in the rock cycle, as more and more layers get added on top of this, it eventually puts a lot of heat and pressure onto this layer, and that rock starts transforming. Well, whenever you get that happening, sometimes things catch fire, or they melt, or there's so much heat that it just burns up the fossil, basically. It destroys that fossil. So, whew, glad I didn't catch the house on fire there. So the fossil's destroyed. And the reason why I go through all that is that we do have fossils on Earth, and there's a lot of them. However, we are missing a large number of fossils. There's some organisms that never became fossilized because they had soft bodies. There's some organisms that never became fossilized because they weren't buried in just the right environment. Maybe they were on a mountaintop. Maybe they were in a desert or something like that, where there's just not the right conditions to encapsulate that organism in a low oxygen environment so that it can then become fossilized. And then some fossils are destroyed. Now, why that's important to remember, it's kind of like reading a book, right? We're trying to set up Earth's history, and a lot of people think, oh, Earth's history is just like reading a book. We have all the pages in here, and you can go through and you can say, yeah, look at this, I can tell the story. But in reality, the book that we're reading from is missing all kinds of pages. And so it's like reading through a book, and all of a sudden, I'm jumping from one thing to the next. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand how it jumped from here to here. So our fossil record is incomplete. Now, scientists do the best they can with what they have, but all of them have the understanding that we don't have a complete record to look at. The last thing that we want to look at really is how sedimentary layers play a process in determining its relative age. So, sedimentary rock is the only rock that fossils are found in, because if it goes through heat and pressure and becomes an igneous rock or a metamorphic rock, it destroys that fossil. So they're only in sedimentary layers. And sedimentary layers, just like if you look at a canyon wall, you'll see stripes in the canyon wall. And those are layers of different rock. And those layers build one on top of the other. So I have my base layer here, and then here's a second layer, and then there's a third layer, and after that there's a fourth layer. And we just keep building layers upon layers of sedimentary rock. Well, to determine relative age, basically it's a very simple process. The rock that's on bottom was there first. It's like a firstborn child. It is the oldest child. It is the oldest layer of rock. And then as you get closer to the top, you get to the younger layers. And the top layer is the youngest layer of all. And so if you have a fossil that's in this top layer and one that's in the bottom layer, you know that the one in the top layer is younger than the one in the bottom layer. And so that's how they use sedimentary layers to help identify the relative age of different organisms. So I hope that this video helped, and I'm sure I'll make some more for you to help you out understand how fossils, how we interpret the fossil record. Thank you.